Hello, dear friend, and welcome to this quiet corner of the evening, where stories unfold like mist across ancient cobblestones, where mysteries beckon not with urgency, but with the gentlest of whispers, inviting you into a world of shadows and candlelight, of rain-soaked streets and warm hearths glowing against the encroaching darkness. Tonight, we journey together into a tale I've prepared especially for you. A narrative designed to slow your racing thoughts, to ease the tensions that have gathered in your shoulders throughout the day, to guide you peacefully toward the restful sleep you so deeply deserve. This story, The Drowned Watchmaker Enigma, unfolds in the gaslit world of Victorian London, where our consulting detective sits by a crackling fire, awaiting the arrival of a mystery that will transport us through fog-laden streets, across misty moorlands, and into the heart of an ancient puzzle involving timepieces that stopped all at once, a clockmaker who vanished beneath dark waters, and secrets hidden within the very mechanisms of measurement itself. Before we begin, I wonder, wherever you are in this vast world, whatever brought you here tonight, I hope you'll find comfort in these words. Perhaps you're listening from a cozy room much like the one I'll describe. Or maybe you're far from home, seeking the solace of a familiar voice in unfamiliar surroundings. Wherever you find yourself, know that this space is yours. This story a gift offered freely, a pathway toward peaceful dreams. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe with me as we begin. The rain had been falling for 3 days without cessation, each droplet contributing its whispered note to the symphony that played against the window panes of 221B Baker Street, creating patterns of sound that shifted and changed like living things, never quite repeating, always familiar, yet perpetually new. Inside, the fire burned with steady warmth, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books whose leather spines gleamed in the flickering light, their titles half visible, promising knowledge of chemistry and criminal history, of botany and the peculiar stains left by various tobaccos. I had positioned myself in the worn leather armchair nearest the hearth, a cup of tea cooling slowly on the small table beside me. The Earl Grey's bergamot scent mingling with the faint aroma of pipe tobacco that seemed permanently woven into the very fabric of our rooms. My companion, the renowned consulting detective Sherlock Holmes, occupied his customary position near the window, his lean frame silhouetted against the grey afternoon light that filtered through the rain-streaked glass, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that attitude of deep contemplation I had come to recognize so well. We had spent the morning in comfortable silence, he absorbed in some chemical experiment that had filled the sitting room with peculiar vapours. Nothing dangerous, he had assured me, merely interesting, while I had attended to correspondence, writing letters to patients, explaining the young key of appointments, updating case notes from recent medical consultations, allowing my pen to scratch across paper with that particular rhythm that becomes almost meditative when one surrenders to it fully. The clock on the mantelpiece, an ornate piece Holmes had acquired during the curious affair of the Belgrave Square inheritance, ticked with patient regularity, marking moments that seemed to stretch and compress in the rain-dimmed afternoon, time becoming something malleable, less urgent, a river flowing at its own pace, rather than a tyrant demanding constant attention. When the knock came at our door, it arrived softly, almost apologetically, as though the visitor hesitated to disturb the afternoon's quietude. "Mrs. Hudson's footsteps ascending the stairs carried their own familiar music, the creak of the seventh step announcing her approach as reliably as any bell. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced, opening the door with careful quietness, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for visitors who arrived in obvious distress. "A Mr. Cornelius Ashwood. He seems rather unsettled, if I may say so." Holmes turned from the window, his grey eyes sharpening with interest, the languor of the afternoon falling away like a discarded cloak. "Show him up, Mrs. Hudson, and perhaps a fresh pot of tea. I suspect our guest has been walking in this weather for some time." The man who entered our rooms moments later bore all the signs of one who had indeed been wandering through London's rain-soaked streets without proper attention to his own welfare. Water dripped from the hem of his coat, pooling on the floorboards, and his hair, what remained of it, lay plastered against his skull in thin, grey streaks. But it was his eyes that captured my immediate attention. Wide, haunted, carrying the peculiar brightness of a man who has witnessed something that has fundamentally disturbed his understanding of the world. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I apologize for arriving without appointment, but I have been walking these past hours trying to convince myself that what I have discovered cannot possibly be real, that there must be some rational explanation. Yet every path my mind travels leads me back to the same impossible conclusion. Please, Mr. Ashwood, sit by the fire." Holmes gestured toward the chair I had just vacated, and I moved quietly to fetch another from across the room. "You are chilled through, and whatever mystery has brought you to our door will benefit from your being in a state to describe it clearly. Watson, if you would assist our guest with his coat." I helped the man remove his sodden outer garment, hanging it near the fire where it began to steam gently, releasing the scent of wet wool and London rain. That particular combination of coal smoke, Thames water, and the indefinable essence of a great city's atmosphere. Mr. Ashwood settled into the chair with visible relief, accepting the cup of tea Mrs. Hudson had brought with trembling hands, the porcelain chattering softly against the saucer. For a long moment he simply sat, warming his hands on the cup, staring into the fire as though seeking answers in its dancing flames. Holmes did not press him, understanding as he did that some stories require their own time to emerge, that pushing too quickly against a rattled mind often scatters the very information one seeks to gather. Outside, the rain continued its endless percussion, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 4 times, the sound muffled by moisture-heavy air, arriving to us as though from a great distance, or perhaps from memory itself. "I am a curator," Mr. Ashwood finally began, his voice steadier now, warmed by the tea and the fire's proximity. "Specifically, I specialize in horology, the study and preservation of timepieces. For the past 15 years, I have held a position at the Blackwood Collection, a private museum of antiquarian clocks and watches housed in Kensington. Perhaps you know of it." Holmes nodded slightly. "I am aware of the collection, though I have never had occasion to visit. Founded by the industrialist Thomas Blackwood in 1862, if memory serves, after he acquired the workshop contents of several notable European clockmakers following a series of financial failures on the continent." "Precisely," Ashwood confirmed, and a fleeting smile crossed his face. The automatic pleasure of the specialist finding another who speaks his particular language. The collection is quite extraordinary, containing pieces from the greatest makers of the 18th and early 19th centuries: Breguet, Mudge, Harrison, Arnold. But the heart of the collection, its crown jewel if you will, consists of 7 timepieces, all created by the same maker, a man named Josiah Whitmore, known in the limited circles that remember him as the drowned watchmaker. At this, Holmes leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening further. Whitmore. Yes, I have encountered references to him in my studies. He worked in the early decades of this century, noted for creating mechanisms of extraordinary precision and peculiar design. Vanished in 1824 under mysterious circumstances involving a bridge and the Thames, if I recall correctly. Indeed, Ashwood continued, his fingers tightening around his teacup. Josiah Whitmore was considered perhaps the most brilliant horologist of his generation, though he was also regarded as eccentric, obsessive. He believed that time itself could be manipulated through proper mechanical intervention, that the measurement of moments and the moments themselves were not separate things, but intimately connected. His colleagues dismissed such notions as the ravings of an overworked mind, but his craftsmanship was so superior that his philosophical peculiarities were tolerated, even indulged. The fire crackled suddenly, sending up a shower of sparks that glowed briefly before winking out like fallen stars, and I found myself settling into my chair, recognizing that we were entering one of those narratives that would occupy us through the evening, that whatever had driven Mr. Ashwood through the rain to our door was not simple, not quickly resolved. On the night of March 7th, 1824, our visitor continued, Whitmore was seen walking toward Westminster Bridge, carrying a leather case that witnesses assumed contained his tools. He never returned to his workshop. 3 days later, his body was recovered from the Thames, the case still clutched in his hand, though when opened, it was found to contain not tools, but rather 7 small mechanical components, gears of a peculiar design, each inscribed with a single word in Latin. The inquest ruled accidental death, suggesting he had stumbled in the darkness, though some whispered of suicide, claiming his obsessive studies had driven him to madness. Holmes rose and walked to his desk, retrieving his pipe, filling it with the slow, deliberate movements of one whose hands require occupation, while the mind processes information. And these 7 components, they were incorporated into timepieces, I presume? Yes, Ashwood confirmed. Whitmore's workshop was inherited by his apprentice, a man named Harrington, who completed 7 watches that had been in various stages of construction at the time of Whitmore's death, incorporating the mysterious gears into their mechanisms. Each watch functioned perfectly, keeping time with extraordinary accuracy, and each bore a name engraved on its casing: temperance, fortitude, prudence, justice, faith, hope, and charity, the 7 virtues. I found myself drawn into the account, the physician in me noting how Ashwood's colour had improved with warmth and tea, how his voice had steadied as he moved from personal distress to the comfort of technical narrative. The rain continued its whispered commentary outside our windows, and the room had taken on that particular quality of sanctuary that sometimes descends on interior spaces when storms rage beyond their walls. The Blackwood collection acquired all 7 pieces in 1863, Ashwood went on, purchasing them from various estates and private collectors at considerable expense. They have been displayed together in a specially designed case in the museum's central gallery for 30 years. each watch, maintained in working order, wound regularly according to a precise schedule I myself established. Until 3 days ago, they had never shown any irregularity, never gained or lost more than a few seconds per month. He paused, setting down his teacup with hands that had begun trembling again. 3 nights ago, at precisely 9:47 in the evening, all 7 watches stopped simultaneously. The statement hung in the air between us, and I could see Holmes's eyes gleaming with that particular intensity that indicated his full engagement. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, a sound like carriages crossing cobblestones in some far corner of the city. Simultaneously, Holmes repeated softly, "You are certain of this?" "Absolutely certain," Ashwood replied. "I was working late in my office, which adjoins the central gallery. I heard a sound, difficult to describe, not loud, but profound somehow, as though the very air had shifted. I entered the gallery immediately and found all 7 watches had stopped, their hands frozen at identical positions, 9:47 and approximately 23 seconds. Though without a magnifying glass, I cannot be more precise." "And you attempted to restart them, naturally," Holmes prompted. "I did," Ashwood confirmed. "Each watch wound normally, the mechanisms appearing sound, but none would run for more than a few seconds before stopping again, always returning to that same position, 9:47 and 23 seconds. I worked through the entire night, examining each piece, finding no mechanical fault, no explanation. In the morning, I consulted 2 colleagues, both master horologists, and they were similarly baffled. The watches appear perfect in every respect, except that they will not, under any circumstances, run past that specific moment in time." Holmes had begun pacing now, 3 steps toward the window, 3 steps back, the rhythm of his movement almost hypnotic, his pipe sending up small clouds of aromatic smoke that drifted toward the ceiling, gathering in the upper reaches of the room like thought made visible. "Has anything else unusual occurred?" he asked. "Any other phenomena associated with this stoppage?" Ashwood hesitated, and in that pause I sensed we were approaching the heart of whatever had truly disturbed him. "This morning I arrived at the museum to find a letter had been delivered, addressed to the keeper of Whitmore's legacy. It contained a single sheet of paper on which was written in an old-fashioned hand a message. 'The hour approaches when all debts come due. What was hidden must be revealed. 7 virtues, 7 keys, 7 locks upon a door that should never have been sealed. The drowned watchmaker rises, and time itself demands accounting.' He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a folded paper, which Holmes accepted with careful fingers, holding it up to the firelight, examining it from multiple angles, his expression unreadable. 'The paper is of excellent quality,' Holmes murmured. 'Watermarked, likely from a specialty stationer. The ink is iron gall, traditional formulation, applied with a genuine quill rather than a modern pen. The handwriting displays characteristics consistent with copperplate script taught in the early decades of this century, either written by someone of considerable age or by someone deliberately mimicking an archaic style.' He passed the letter to me, and I studied the words, feeling an inexplicable chill despite the fire's warmth. The message seemed to vibrate with import, with suggestion of mysteries extending far beyond the simple failure of 7 timepieces. 'Mr. Ashwood,' Holmes said, returning the letter to our visitor, 'I will take your case. However, I must be clear that what you seek from me may not be simple, mechanical explanation. If these watches have indeed stopped for supernatural reasons, I cannot restart them through spiritualist means. I deal only in observation, deduction, and material evidence. But if there is a human agency behind these events, if there is a puzzle to be solved through logic and investigation, then I am your man. I seek only truth, Mr. Holmes, Ashwood replied, rising from his chair with renewed energy, his earlier distress transformed into something more like hope. Whatever that truth may be, I must know it. The Blackwood collection is my life's work, and these 7 pieces are its heart. If there is meaning in their silence, I must understand it. Very well, Holmes confirmed. Watson, are you amenable to an evening expedition? I should like to examine these timepieces directly, and the museum will be closed to the public by now, offering us the quiet and privacy such an investigation requires. I agreed immediately, as Holmes had known I would, already anticipating the coach ride through rain-washed streets, the examination of mysterious mechanisms by lamplight, the slow unfolding of whatever enigma had reached across decades to disturb the present moment. Within half an hour, we were descending the stairs of 221 B. Baker Street, our coats fastened against the persistent rain, Mr. Ashwood leading us toward a waiting hansom cab whose horse stood patient in the downpour, steam rising from its flanks. The driver hunched beneath an oilcloth cape that glistened with moisture. The Blackwood collection, Kensington, Holmes instructed, and we climbed into the cab's narrow interior, the 3 of us fitting snugly, the rain drumming on the roof above our heads as we lurched into motion. The journey through London's evening streets possessed that dreamlike quality that rain imparts to familiar landscapes, transforming the known into something strange and new. Gas lamps created pools of amber light that reflected in endless puddles, fragmenting and multiplying until the city seemed to exist in 2 realms simultaneously. The solid world of stone and brick above, and a shimmering, inverted kingdom below, glimpsed in wet pavement and standing water. We passed through neighbourhoods whose character shifted subtly, the commercial bustle of Baker Street giving way to the residential dignity of Marylebone, then the grander facades of Mayfair, and finally the quieter streets of Kensington, where large houses stood behind iron railings, their windows glowing warmly, suggesting lives being lived in comfort and security, families gathering for evening meals, children being tucked into beds, the ordinary domestic rituals that continue regardless of the mysteries that swirl through the darkness beyond their doors. The Blackwood collection occupied a converted townhouse on a street lined with plane trees whose bare branches reached toward the sky like supplicants seeking benediction. The building's exterior displayed the restrained elegance characteristic of Georgian architecture: symmetrical windows, Portland stone facade, a fanlight above the main entrance depicting a clock face with Roman numerals, the hands permanently fixed at midnight or noon. I could not determine which. Mr. Ashwood produced an impressive ring of keys, selecting one and applying it to the lock with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The door swung inward, revealing an entrance hall lit by a single gas lamp turned low, its light barely sufficient to illuminate the checkered marble floor and the grand staircase ascending into shadow. "The gallery is on the first floor," our guide whispered, though there seemed no need for quiet in the empty building. Perhaps the silence itself demanded respect, the way certain spaces, libraries, churches, museums, seemed to request hushed voices and careful movements. We climbed the stairs, our footsteps muffled by a runner of deep burgundy carpet. The walls on either side displaying framed documents and portraits. The museum's founder, Thomas Blackwood, his stern face captured in oils, technical drawings of various clock mechanisms rendered with extraordinary precision, certificates of authenticity and provenance for significant acquisitions. At the first floor landing, Ashwood led us through double doors into a room that took my breath away, despite, or perhaps because of, its singular focus. The central gallery was circular, its domed ceiling painted with a celestial map showing constellations and planetary orbits. The paint touched with some luminous quality that allowed it to glow faintly in the darkness. Around the walls stood glass cases housing timepieces of every description, tall case clocks whose painted faces depicted pastoral scenes, ornate mantel clocks topped with bronze figures representing the seasons, astronomical clocks showing the positions of celestial bodies, watches displayed on velvet cushions like crown jewels. But dominating the room's centre, beneath the painted stars, stood a circular case of glass and mahogany, and within it, arranged like points on a compass, rested 7 pocket watches, each suspended on a small stand that held it upright, its face visible, its mechanism accessible from behind through a crystal panel. Holmes approached the case slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes taking in every detail. I followed, equally drawn, and as we drew near, I could see that each watch was indeed a masterwork of the horologist's art. Cases of gold and silver, some engine-turned with patterns that caught the light, others engraved with elaborate scenes, angels and demons, celestial bodies, geometric patterns of hypnotic complexity. And on each face, the hands stood frozen at precisely the same position. Ashwood unlocked the case with trembling fingers, the key clicking softly in the mechanism, and carefully lifted the glass lid, which rose on hidden hinges with a sigh of air, as though the case itself had been holding its breath. "May I?" Holmes asked, and at Ashwood's nod, he reached out with infinite care, lifting the first watch, labelled Temperance, on a small brass plaque beneath its stand. For the next hour, I watched as Holmes conducted perhaps the most thorough examination I had ever witnessed him perform. He produced a jeweller's loupe from his pocket, studying each watch under magnification, noting the construction of every visible component. He wound each mechanism, listening to the internal workings with the concentration of a physician auscultating a patient's heartbeat. He compared the engravings, the inscriptions, the placement of the mysterious gears that had been found with Whitmore's body. Throughout this examination, Ashwood provided commentary in a hushed voice, explaining the function of various components, the significance of particular design choices, the ways in which Whitmore's work had differed from his contemporaries. I found myself lulled by the technical language, the soft descriptions of escapements and hairsprings, fusees and jewel bearings, the terminology washing over me like poetry in an unknown language, beautiful in its sound, even when meaning remained partially obscure. At one point, Holmes paused, holding the watch named Prudence close to the lamplight, his expression intent. "Watson, your medical bag. Do you have your magnifying glass?" I retrieved the instrument from my bag, which I had brought from habit, and passed it to Holmes. He held it over the watch's face, focusing on something I could not discern. "Interesting," he murmured. "There are markings here, engraved on the underside of the crystal. nearly invisible unless the light strikes at precisely the correct angle. Numbers, I believe, or perhaps letters. Ashwood, were you aware of this? Our client moved closer, peering where Holmes indicated. No, he breathed. In all my years of maintaining these pieces, I never noticed. Are they on all 7? Together, we examined each watch in turn, and indeed, each crystal bore similar markings, faint scratches that might have been dismissed as wear or damage, but which, under magnification, revealed themselves as deliberate inscriptions. Holmes withdrew a notebook from his coat and began sketching the symbols, his pencil moving with quick precision. When he had documented all 7, he stepped back, studying his notes with an expression I recognized. The look of a man who has found not an answer, but rather the first solid clue that might lead toward one. These are coordinates, he announced quietly. Latitude and longitude, unless I am greatly mistaken. 7 locations marked on 7 timepieces. Mr. Ashwood, do you have maps of London and the surrounding regions readily available? In my office, yes. Comprehensive ordnance surveys and historical maps of the city. Excellent. Let us see where these coordinates might lead us. Ashwood's office proved to be exactly what one might expect of a specialist curator. Every available surface covered with books, journals, and documents, all relating to horology and its history. A workbench held tools of remarkable delicacy, tiny screwdrivers, tweezers, brushes of various sizes, and several timepieces in various states of disassembly, their innards exposed like anatomical specimens. The curator cleared a space on his desk and unrolled a large map of London and environs, weighting its corners with books. Holmes began plotting the coordinates, marking each location with a pencil dot, speaking the positions aloud as he worked. When all 7 points had been marked, we stood back to observe the pattern they created. The locations formed a shape, not random, not scattered, but deliberate. If one connected the points in sequence, they created a 7-sided figure, a heptagon, its center falling somewhere in the heart of the city. Curious, Holmes murmured, producing a ruler and drawing lines to connect the points more precisely. Each location appears to correspond to a significant structure. Churches, mostly, with one exception. St. Paul's Cathedral here, Westminster Abbey here, St. Martin in the Fields, St. George's Bloomsbury, St. Mary Le Bow, St. Bride's Fleet Street, and this final point. He tapped his pencil against the 7th location, which fell not on a church, but rather in a less distinguished area south of the river. This is Rotherhithe, is it not? The location appears to be on or very near the Thames itself. The very area where Whitmore's body was recovered, Ashwood said softly, and I felt the pieces of the mystery beginning to align, though their ultimate configuration remained obscure. Holmes stepped back, his expression thoughtful. 7 watches, 7 virtues, 7 locations forming a geometric pattern with symbolic significance. This is not random, gentlemen. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to embed a message, a map, perhaps even instructions within these timepieces. The question becomes, who created this pattern, and why has it been activated now, after 70 years of silence? A new sound entered our awareness, a bell tower somewhere in the night, striking 9 times. And as the 9th chime faded, from the gallery beyond came a sound that froze us all in place, the clear, bright chiming of multiple timepieces striking the hour. We rushed back to the central gallery, and what I saw there sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The 7 watches were running, their second hands sweeping smoothly around the dials, all synchronized perfectly, all showing the time as 9 o'clock precisely. "But that's impossible," Ashwood whispered. "I wound them earlier, and they stopped immediately. I've done nothing different." "The plotting of the coordinates," Holmes interrupted. "The act of revealing the pattern, of bringing the hidden map into conscious awareness. Could it be that simple? That these mechanisms were designed not merely to keep time, but to respond to specific conditions being met?" He approached the case, watching the watches intently, and I joined him, observing as the second hands continued their patient journey, marking moments with perfect mechanical precision. At 9:01 they continued running. At 9:02 they maintained their synchronized progression. And then, at 9:03 and 17 seconds, all 7 watches stopped again, as suddenly as they had started, their hands freezing in new positions. Holmes leaned closer, examining the stopped hands. "Note the positions," he said urgently. "The hour hands all point to 9, but the minute hands—" He paused, calculating. "If we assign each watch a number based on its position in the case, moving clockwise from temperance as 1, then note which hour each minute hand points toward." He pulled out his notebook, scribbling quickly. "Temperance points to 7, fortitude to 4, prudence to 8, justice to 1, faith to 8, hope to 2, charity to 4, 7, 4, 8, 1, 8, 2, 4. Could these be—" "A date," I suggested. "The 7th of April, 1824. "Or coordinates within the pattern," Holmes countered. "Or a reference to something else entirely. But it is clearly deliberate, clearly another layer of the puzzle." He turned to Ashwood. "I must ask, sir, do you trust me to remove these watches from the museum? I believe the next phase of our investigation must involve visiting these 7 locations in sequence, bringing the corresponding watch to each site. I cannot guarantee their safety during such an expedition, though I will exercise every precaution." Ashwood paled, but nodded slowly. "Mr. Holmes, these timepieces have been my responsibility for 15 years, and I have guarded them as I would guard my own children. But I recognize that they are not merely objects. They are a message, a puzzle that has chosen this moment to demand solution. If you believe this necessary, I will support you, though I insist on accompanying you throughout. I could not bear to let them leave my sight." "I would not have it otherwise," Holmes assured him. "Your expertise will be invaluable, and besides, this mystery belongs to you as much as to anyone. Watson, I assume you are amenable to what promises to be an extensive expedition through London's sacred spaces." "I would not miss it," I confirmed, though I confess a part of me wondered what we were truly embarking upon. The rain continued outside, and the hour was growing late, but sleep seemed a distant prospect, irrelevant in the face of the enigma unfolding before us. We spent the next half hour carefully packing the 7 watches in a specially designed case Ashwood retrieved from his workroom, a box lined with velvet, each watch settling into its own protective compartment, the whole thing lockable and small enough to be carried with relative ease. "Where shall we begin?" Ashwood asked, as Holmes secured the case. "Logic suggests we follow the sequence indicated by the watches' positions in the display," Holmes replied. "Temperance first, which corresponds to St. Paul's Cathedral. However, at this hour, we cannot gain access to the interior of most of these structures. I propose we begin our survey in the morning, approaching each location methodically, observing what we observe, allowing the pattern to reveal itself. You are suggesting we wait? Ashwood seemed distressed by this notion, his earlier eagerness to understand now clearly warring with the exhaustion of his 3 days of worry. I am suggesting we prepare properly, Holmes corrected gently. This mystery has waited 70 years. It will wait until morning. Besides, the rain shows no sign of abating, and I have found that investigations conducted in discomfort often miss details that would be apparent in more favourable conditions. Mr. Ashwood, you are welcome to stay at Baker Street tonight. We have a serviceable settee, and I suspect you could use the rest. Tomorrow we begin in earnest. The journey back through rain-swept London possessed a different quality than our outward trip, the precious cargo we now carried lending weight to every moment. Every jolt of the carriage over cobblestones, every turn through darkened streets. The city seemed quieter now, as though holding its breath, as though aware that something significant had been set in motion. Back at Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson, bless her enduring patience with our irregular hours, had kept the fire burning and quickly assembled bedding for our guest. I made cocoa in the kitchen, the simple domestic task grounding me after the evening's strange revelations, and we three sat around the fire, speaking little, each lost in our own thoughts. The case containing the watches rested on the table between us, and my eyes kept returning to it, wondering at the mechanisms within, the gears and springs and jewelled bearings that had been crafted with such precision, encoded with such mystery, all those decades ago. Tell me, Holmes said eventually, breaking the long silence, what is known of Whitmore's personal life, his family, his associations, his beliefs? Ashwood stirred, wrapping his hands around his cocoa cup. Very little, unfortunately. He was intensely private, never married, lived alone in rooms above his workshop in Clerkenwell. His apprentice, Harrington, reported that Whitmore spoke often of time as if it were alive, conscious, not merely a measurement, but an entity with will and purpose. He believed, or claimed to believe, that certain moments possessed greater significance than others, that time itself concentrated and diluted according to patterns humans only dimly perceived. Did he belong to any societies, fraternities, philosophical organizations? Holmes pressed. Not officially, though there were rumors he associated with a group called the Eternal Brotherhood, supposedly a collection of scientists, philosophers, and mystics who studied the nature of time, mortality, and consciousness. But the group, if it ever truly existed, left no formal records, no membership lists, just whispers and suggestions in the margins of other documents. Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting firelight, and I could see his mind working, connecting, theorizing. Outside, the rain drummed its endless rhythm, and the clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward midnight, toward the transition between one day and the next, each second falling away into the past, irretrievable, each future moment approaching with patient inevitability. Eventually, we settled into our sleeping arrangements, Ashwood on the settee, I in my bedroom, and Holmes in his chair by the dying fire. He often slept thus, when sleep came to him at all, claiming that beds were for those whose minds quieted easily, a condition from which he did not suffer. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams of endless corridors lined with clocks, each showing a different time, each ticking at a different rate. The cacophony of competing rhythms building until I woke briefly in the darkness, heard only the rain and the house's settling creaks, and drifted back into unconsciousness like a stone sinking through water, down into deeper, quieter places where dreams take different forms. Morning arrived with surprising brightness, the rain having finally ceased sometime before dawn, leaving London washed clean, its stones gleaming wet, the air carrying that particular clarity that follows sustained storms, a transparency, almost, as if one could see farther, see more clearly, the atmospheric veils temporarily parted. I woke to the smell of breakfast. Mrs. Hudson had prepared a substantial meal of eggs, toast, kippers, and strong tea, and descended to find Holmes and Ashwood already dressed, the latter looking considerably improved after a night's rest, the haunted quality in his eyes replaced by determination. "Good morning, Watson," Holmes greeted me. "I trust you slept adequately. We have a considerable day before us, and I suspect will require full faculties." Over breakfast, Holmes outlined his proposed approach. We would visit each of the 7 locations in the sequence indicated by the watch's positions, bringing the corresponding timepiece to each site. At each location, we would observe, document, and wait to see if any phenomena occurred. "I have telegraphed several of my contacts regarding access to these churches," he explained, buttering toast with methodical precision. "St. Paul's has agreed to accommodate us at 10 o'clock, before the building opens to general visitors. We will proceed from there in geographical efficiency, rather than strict numerical sequence. The pattern's revelation may not require the locations be visited in any particular order." By 9:30, we had secured a 4-wheeler, more stable than a hansom for our purposes, and set out into a London transformed by sunlight and rain-scrubbed air. The city sparkled, and despite the strange nature of our mission, I felt my spirits lift at the simple beauty of the morning, at the sight of shopkeepers opening their establishments, children walking to school, the ordinary commerce of daily life resuming after the storm's interruption. St. Paul's Cathedral rose before us like a benediction made stone, Wren's magnificent dome dominating the skyline, its crosses and lantern catching the morning light, seeming almost to float above the city, transcendent despite its massive solidity. We approached via Ludgate Hill, the cathedral's western facade growing larger with each step, the complexity of its design revealing itself gradually. Columns and pediments, statues in niches, the geometric precision of its proportions, creating an effect simultaneously imposing and harmonious. Our contact, a senior verger named Mr. Pemberton, met us at a side entrance, his expression curious but welcoming. "Mr. Holmes, good morning. Your telegram mentioned a historical investigation regarding timepieces and the cathedral's construction." "Precisely," Holmes confirmed, the small deception having been necessary to secure our access. "We are researching the work of Josiah Whitmore, a clockmaker, who may have had connections to this cathedral in the... We have a pocket watch we believe may have been intended for installation here, and we wished to examine it within the space for which it might have been designed." Pemberton nodded, accepting this explanation, and led us into the cathedral's vast interior. I had visited St. Paul's before, of course, but familiarity did not diminish its impact. The soaring arches, the painted dome ceiling, depicting scenes from the life of St. Paul. The way sound behaved differently in such a space. Footsteps and voices taking on a quality almost ethereal. echoing from stone surfaces that had absorbed prayers and hymns for 2 centuries. Holmes removed the watch labelled Temperance from its case, holding it carefully, and we walked slowly through the cathedral, pausing at various locations. The nave, the crossing beneath the dome, the choir, the chapels radiating from the ambulatory. At each spot, Holmes consulted a small compass he had brought, checking orientations, comparing the cathedral's layout to something in his notebook. "The coordinate places us approximately here," he murmured, standing in the northern transept, beneath a memorial to a naval hero whose name I did not catch. "Watson, note the time, if you would." I consulted my own watch. 10:23. Holmes wound the pocket watch, Temperance, and we waited, watching its face in the morning light filtered through clerestory windows. The second hand began its sweep, the watch ticking audibly in the cathedral's profound quiet. For 60 seconds, it ran perfectly. Then, at 10:24 exactly, it stopped. "Interesting," Holmes murmured, immediately winding it again. Again, it ran for precisely 1 minute before stopping. Ashwood leaned closer, his breath quickening. "That's different from the museum. There, they stopped at specific positions. Here, it runs for a measured duration, regardless of starting position." "A timer rather than a timekeeper," Holmes agreed, measuring out a specific interval, 1 minute. In some contexts, scarcely any time at all. In others, he trailed off, thoughtful. We spent another half hour in the cathedral, experimenting with the watch at different locations. But the pattern remained consistent. Wherever we started it, it ran for precisely 60 seconds before stopping. Only within St. Paul's did this occur. Outside, in the churchyard, the watch stopped immediately upon winding, just as it had in the museum. The location activates some property of the mechanism, Holmes concluded as we returned to our carriage. The question is whether this is a mechanical response to some physical characteristic of the space. Magnetic field, perhaps, or acoustic resonance, or whether we're dealing with something more unusual. Our next destination was Westminster Abbey, that ancient shrine where kings are crowned and poets buried, where the stones themselves seem to exhale history, where every surface bears memorials to someone who shaped the nation's story. The coordinates for fortitude placed us in the Poets' Corner, surrounded by monuments to literary greatness. And here, the second watch ran for 2 minutes before stopping. At St. Martin in the Fields, Prudence ran for 3 minutes. At St. George's Bloomsbury, with its peculiar stepped pyramid tower, topped by a statue of George I, Justice ran for 4 minutes. The pattern was clear now, each watch corresponding to its numerical position, each activated only within its designated location, each measuring out its specific interval with perfect precision before stopping. By early afternoon, we had visited 5 of the 7 churches, and exhaustion was beginning to show in Ashwood's face, though his determination never wavered. We paused for lunch at a public house near St. Mary le Bow, where the famous Bow bells, those markers of true Cockney birth, hung silent above us, their music reserved for weddings and celebrations. 2 locations remain, Holmes said, studying his annotated map while we ate mutton pies and drank bitter. St. Bride's, the journalist's church, and then the final coordinate in Rotherhithe. I confess, I am eager to see what that location reveals, given its significance to Whitmore's story. At St. Bride's, the watch named Hope ran for 6 minutes, an eternity compared to the earlier durations. and we stood in silence, watching the second hand sweep round and round, marking time that felt increasingly surreal, disconnected from the ordinary flow of moments. When it finally stopped, Holmes immediately wound it again, and again it measured out exactly 6 minutes before falling silent. 7 watches, 7 locations, 7 intervals, he mused. Temperance runs for 1 minute, fortitude 2, prudence 3, justice 4, faith 5, hope 6, and presumably charity will run for 7 minutes. 28 minutes total, if all were run simultaneously. But to what end? What happens when all 7 timers reach their conclusions? Perhaps nothing, I suggested. Perhaps Whitmore simply created an elaborate puzzle, a demonstration of his technical skill and his philosophical obsessions, never intending it to have practical application. Perhaps, Holmes acknowledged, though his tone suggested he believed otherwise. But men do not typically drown themselves while clutching elaborate puzzles, Watson. There is purpose here, intention, and I suspect we will understand it when we reach the final location. The journey to Rotherhithe took us across the Thames via London Bridge, the river running high and brown with the recent rains, its surface reflecting the afternoon sky like hammered pewter. The southern bank presented a different face of London, more industrial, more rough-edged, the elegance of the West End replaced by warehouses and dockyards. The smell of the river stronger here, mixed with tar and coal smoke, and the indefinable scent of commerce. Holmes directed our driver through increasingly narrow streets, consulting his map frequently, until we arrived at a small, desolate stretch of riverbank, where warehouses loomed on one side, and the Thames lapped at rotting pilings on the other. A few watermen's boats lay pulled up on the muddy shore, and in the distance a steam whistle signalled some ship's departure. According to the coordinates, we are standing almost exactly on the spot, Holmes announced, stepping down from the carriage, the final watch, Charity, in his hand. The location seemed utterly unremarkable, a stretch of river frontage that had likely changed little in 70 years. The kind of place where the city simply stopped, giving way to the water's ancient dominion. A few seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the quieter sounds of water and distant industry. "Is there any structure here?" Ashwood asked, looking around uncertainly. The other locations were all churches, sacred spaces. This is just emptiness, I finished, or what appears to be emptiness. Holmes, however, was examining the ground with intense concentration, walking slowly along the riverbank, his eyes moving between his compass and the muddy earth. "Watson, in your medical bag, do you have your surgical probe?" I produced the requested instrument, and Holmes took it, kneeling at a particular spot and pushing the probe into the soft ground. It sank perhaps 6 inches before meeting resistance. "Stone," he announced. "Flat stone, possibly worked. Help me clear this area." For the next quarter hour, we 3 laboured with our hands and sticks found nearby, scraping away mud and accumulated silt, revealing what Holmes had detected. A stone platform, perhaps 10 feet across, its surface level and clearly artificial, despite its weathered state. At its centre, we uncovered an engraving, almost worn smooth by time and tidal action, but still faintly visible. A 7-sided star, and within each point, a word in Latin, the same words, we would later confirm, that had been inscribed on the gears found with Whitmore's body. "Stand back," Holmes instructed, positioning himself at the platform's centre, the watch called Charity held before him. He wound the mechanism, and we waited, holding our breath without quite knowing why. The watch began to tick, its sound surprisingly loud in the afternoon quiet, and this time it did not stop. 1 minute passed, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and finally 7, and still the watch ran, its second hand sweeping steadily around the dial. At precisely 7.5 minutes, the watch chimed, a sound I had not heard any of them make before, and then fell silent. Its mechanism stopped, its purpose apparently fulfilled. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like an exhaled breath, a grinding of stone on stone, a section of the platform beneath Holmes's feet shifted, sinking slightly and sliding aside, revealing darkness below, a cavity, a chamber hidden beneath the riverbank, for who knew how long. Holmes produced a dark lantern from our carriage, ever prepared, my companion, and lit it, directing its beam into the opening. A ladder, iron rungs set into stone, descended into shadow. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I believe we have found what Whitmore wished us to find." The descent took courage. I will not pretend otherwise. The ladder was slick with moisture, the rungs cold beneath my hands, and the darkness below seemed absolute, the kind of darkness that exists only in spaces untouched by light for vast durations. Holmes went first, Ashwood second, and I brought up the rear, pulling the displaced stone partially back over the opening above us. Not from any rational concern, but from some instinct about maintaining concealment. The ladder descended perhaps 20 feet before reaching a floor of flagstones, and we found ourselves in a chamber roughly circular, its walls brick, its ceiling vaulted, clearly constructed with skill and intended for permanence. The air was cool but not foul, suggesting ventilation from somewhere, and as Holmes raised the lantern higher, the chamber's contents revealed themselves. Along the walls stood 7 niches, each containing an object. Here a thick book, there an astrolabe, bronze and gleaming despite the years, a chart showing astronomical movements, a case containing small bottles of various substances, a mechanical device whose purpose I could not immediately discern, a collection of letters tied with ribbon, and finally a portrait in oils, the paint still bright, showing a man's face, lean, intense, with eyes that seemed to follow our movements in the wavering lantern light. "Josiah Whitmore," Ashwood breathed, approaching the portrait. "I've seen sketches, but never a painting. He looks so young, so alive," I finished. "He looks alive, as if the artist captured not just appearance, but some essential quality of being." Holmes, however, had moved to the book, opening it carefully, his eyes scanning pages filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams, mathematical notations. "This is a journal," he reported, dated entries beginning in 1818 and continuing until... The final entry is dated March 7th, 1824, the day he died. He began reading aloud, his voice steady, the words of a man 70 years dead filling the underground chamber. "I have discovered what my colleagues refuse to acknowledge, that time is not uniform, not consistent, but rather flows at varying rates depending on consciousness, on attention, on the significance of events transpiring within it. A moment of pure joy expands, becomes infinite in subjective experience, while hours of drudgery compress to nothing in memory. This is not mere psychological perception, but actual property of time itself, which dilates and contracts in response to meaning. I have built mechanisms that can measure these variations, that can detect the pools and eddies in time's stream, the places where moments accumulate, where significance concentrates. The 7 churches I have chosen represent nodes of such concentration, places where prayers, aspirations, deaths, births, the full spectrum of human meaning has been focused for centuries, creating temporal density, creating pockets where time behaves differently. My 7 watches are keys, designed to unlock these pockets, to allow what has accumulated to be accessed. Each virtue, temperance, fortitude, prudence, justice, faith, hope, charity, corresponds to a particular quality of temporal density, a particular flavor of concentrated meaning. When activated in proper sequence, they will open a doorway, though to where or when I cannot predict with certainty. I have hidden my discoveries here. In this chamber I have constructed in secret over the course of 2 years, employing workmen from different districts so none would know the whole project. I have encoded the chamber's location in the watches themselves, trusting that someday someone with sufficient curiosity and determination will solve the puzzle. If you are reading this, you have succeeded where I could not. I grew afraid, you see. I discovered that time is not merely measurable, but malleable, that with the proper mechanisms and the proper understanding, one could step outside its normal flow, could access moments thought lost, could perhaps even change what history records as fixed. The responsibility terrified me. Who am I to wield such power? What right have I to alter the stream in which all humanity swims? So I have hidden the knowledge, locked it away, and tonight I will carry the final gears into the Thames, will give them to the water, and with them the ability to complete my greatest work. Let the watches remain curiosities. Let my theories die with me. Let time flow as it will without my interference. But if the river does not claim the gears, if they are found, if the watches are activated, and this chamber opened, then you who read this must decide what I could not. Should time's doors remain locked, or should we dare to step through them, to face what we might find in time's hidden places? The mechanisms I leave here will show you how, should you choose to proceed. The journals contain my complete findings. The astrolabe can measure temporal density with accuracy I have perfected over decades. The chemicals can be combined to create a compound that, when consumed, heightens temporal sensitivity to extraordinary degrees. I leave the choice to you, as I could not make it myself. Perhaps, in whatever time you inhabit, the world will be ready for this knowledge. Perhaps you will be braver, or wiser, or more foolish than I. Signed this 7th day of March, 1824, in full knowledge that these may be the last words I write. Josiah Whitmore, watchmaker, and briefly, unwilling, a man who glimpsed behind time's curtain and found the view too terrible, too wonderful to bear. Holmes closed the journal carefully, and for a long moment the 3 of us stood in silence, the lantern's light casting our shadows long against the brick walls, making us seem like giants, like beings from some older, stranger age. He built a time machine, Ashwood whispered finally. Or at least, he believed he had discovered principles that would allow such a thing. Perhaps, Holmes replied, his voice thoughtful. Or perhaps he discovered something else, a way to access memory, to experience preserved moments, to navigate not through time itself, but through the accumulated meaning time contains. The distinction may be less clear than we imagine. What do we do? I asked, the question feeling enormous in the underground quiet. Do we continue? Do we test his theories? Holmes turned to look at me. and in the lantern light, his face showed something I rarely saw there: uncertainty. That, my friends, is precisely the question Whitmore could not answer. We have solved his puzzle, found his hidden chamber, received his message across 7 decades. But whether we choose to proceed further, to activate whatever mechanisms he has left us, to drink whatever compounds he has prepared. He trailed off, then smiled slightly. I propose we do what Whitmore did not. We think carefully. We research. We do not make such a decision in the excitement of discovery, but rather in the calm reflection of considered judgment. You're saying we should leave? Ashwood sounded simultaneously relieved and disappointed. I'm saying we should document everything here, photograph it if possible, bring proper scientific equipment, consult with experts in relevant fields, and then, if we decide to proceed, do so with full understanding of what we're attempting. Whitmore rushed forward in isolation, and it destroyed him. We need not repeat his mistake. It was, I reflected, perhaps the wisest course, though a part of me, the part that had followed Holmes into countless dangers, that thrived on mystery and revelation, yearned to press forward immediately, to see what Whitmore's mechanisms might reveal. We spent the remainder of the afternoon documenting the chamber's contents in Holmes's notebook, carefully examining each object without disturbing them significantly. The mechanical device proved to be a kind of chronometer, though far more complex than any I had seen, with dials measuring not just hours and minutes, but also what Whitmore's notes called temporal density and significance gradients, concepts I only dimly grasped. The letters, when carefully examined, proved to be correspondence with other members of the mysterious Eternal Brotherhood, discussing theories of time, consciousness, and reality that blended physics, philosophy, and what could only be called mysticism into an intoxicating and bewildering whole. As evening approached, we climbed back up the ladder, emerging into a twilight London transformed by our afternoon's discoveries. The ordinary world seemed strange now, provisional somehow, as if the solid present through which we moved was merely one option among infinite possibilities, one stream among many in time's great delta. We replaced the stone covering the chamber's entrance, disguising it again with mud and debris, and returned to our carriage, each lost in private thoughts, the weight of Whitmore's legacy settling over us like a cloak. The journey back to Baker Street passed in near silence, the city's evening life surrounding us, but feeling distant, as if we moved through it without quite touching it. Travellers returned from a foreign country, finding their homeland slightly altered, or perhaps finding themselves altered and the homeland unchanged. At 2:21, Mrs. Hudson, had tea waiting, and we gathered in the sitting room, the familiar space offering comfort through its very ordinariness. The books still on their shelves, the fire still crackling in its grate, the clock still ticking away moments with patient consistency. "I have a proposal," Holmes said after we had rested, drunk tea, allowed the day's discoveries to settle in our minds. "We must decide whether to pursue Whitmore's work further. Yes, but that decision need not be made tonight, nor this week, nor perhaps even this month. What I suggest is this. We document everything thoroughly. We research Whitmore's theories against current scientific understanding. We consult with physicists, philosophers, perhaps even theologians. We approach this as an investigation, not an adventure." "And the watches?" Ashwood asked. "What becomes of them?" "They return to the Blackwood collection," Holmes replied firmly. "That is their home, their proper context. But now you know what they truly are. Not merely masterworks of horology, but keys to a deeper mystery. They should be preserved, protected, maintained, and perhaps, someday, their full purpose may be realized, but not hastily, not recklessly." Ashwood nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. I came to you in distress, seeking explanation for what seemed impossible. You've given me far more: context, history, purpose. The watches can rest now, and I with them, knowing their story." We sat in comfortable silence for a time, and then Ashwood rose, preparing to depart. Holmes had arranged a cab to return him to Kensington, and we saw him to the door, the case containing the 7 watches once again in his care. "Thank you," he said simply, shaking our hands, "for solving what I thought unsolvable, for treating my concerns with seriousness rather than dismissal. Whatever comes of this, I am grateful." When he had gone, Holmes and I returned to our chairs, the evening stretching before us with unusual openness. No further appointments, no pressing matters, just the quiet company of a fire and the rain, which had resumed its gentle percussion against the windows. "Do you think his theories were sound?" I asked eventually. "Could time truly be manipulated as he suggested?" Holmes was quiet for a long moment, smoke from his pipe drifting toward the ceiling in lazy spirals. "I think," he said slowly, "that Josiah Whitmore was a man far ahead of his time, perhaps literally. What he described sounds like fantasy, and yet physicists are beginning to suggest that time may not be the simple, uniform flow we've always assumed. Einstein is doing remarkable work on simultaneity and relativity. Perhaps Whitmore intuited truths that science is only now beginning to formalize. But whether his mechanisms truly functioned as he believed, whether his chemicals could actually heighten temporal perception, whether any of it was more than elaborate delusion supported by coincidence, that I cannot say with certainty. And perhaps that uncertainty is itself valuable, Watson. Some mysteries may be more useful unsolved, keeping us humble, reminding us how much remains unknown." "What will you tell Ashwood, ultimately?" I asked, "when he asks whether you'll pursue the investigation further?" Holmes smiled slightly. "I'll tell him the truth, that some doors, once discovered, can remain unopened without diminishing their value. That knowledge of the door's existence is itself profound, even if we choose not to walk through. That wisdom sometimes manifests as restraint rather than action. And yet," he added, his eyes gleaming, "I suspect I will find it very difficult to forget that chamber, those mechanisms, those theories. Like Whitmore, I may find myself unable to resist investigating further, even while recognizing the potential dangers. The curiosity that drives scientific inquiry does not quiet easily, particularly when confronted with mysteries as profound as these." "Then we will investigate carefully," I said firmly. "Together, methodically, with proper precautions. As you said, not as adventure, but as serious inquiry." "Together," Holmes agreed, and in that word I heard both commitment and comfort, the promise that whatever lay ahead, we would face it as we had faced so many challenges before, in partnership, with reason as our guide and friendship as our foundation. The rain continued through the evening, and at some point Mrs. Hudson brought up a late supper, which we ate while discussing the day's events in more detail, working through implications and possibilities, theories and counter-theories. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and gradually shifted to other topics. Cases from years past, medical innovations, the state of the world, the small observations and large questions that filled our shared life. Eventually, exhaustion claimed its due, and we retired to our respective chambers. I lay in my bed, listening to London's nighttime sounds. Rain, distant hooves on cobblestones, the Westminster chimes marking midnight, the house settling around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Sleep approached slowly, and as it did, my mind wandered through the day's discoveries, seeing again the 7 watches, the underground chamber, Whitmore's painted eyes seeming to follow our movements. I thought about time itself, that invisible river we all navigate, carrying us inexorably forward, allowing no return to past moments except through memory's imperfect preservation. What would it mean, I wondered, to step outside that flow, to access time's hidden places, to experience moments that had passed beyond ordinary reach? The possibility seemed both wondrous and terrifying, a power too great for mortal hands, yet also deeply human in its aspiration, the desire to preserve what we love, to correct what we regret, to understand fully what we experienced only partially in its first passing. And then I thought of Holmes's words about uncertainty being valuable, about some mysteries serving us better unsolved, and I understood what he meant. The 7 watches could remain in their case, beautiful and mysterious, their full capabilities unexplored, and this would not diminish their importance. They existed as testament to one man's extraordinary vision, his technical genius, his philosophical daring, his ultimate humility in recognizing limits to his own wisdom. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the true treasure Whitmore had left was not the mechanisms themselves, but the questions they raised, the possibilities they suggested, the reminder that reality contained more mystery than our philosophies accounted for, more wonder than our sciences could yet explain. With these thoughts drifting through my mind, like boats on a quiet river, I felt consciousness beginning to slip away, the day's events taking on the quality of dream, and I surrendered to sleep's embrace, trusting that tomorrow would bring its own mysteries, its own challenges, its own moments worth preserving in memory's careful keeping. The days that followed our discovery beneath the Rotherhithe riverbank assumed a curious quality, simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary, as if we were living in 2 realities at once, the mundane world of daily routine and the mysterious realm of Whitmore's legacy, which occupied our thoughts even when our bodies were engaged in prosaic activities. Holmes threw himself into research with characteristic intensity, though tempered by the patience he had counselled. He corresponded with physicists at Cambridge and Oxford, framing his inquiries carefully, asking theoretical questions about time, consciousness, and measurement without revealing the specific context that motivated his interest. He consulted historical archives, seeking information about the Eternal Brotherhood, finding tantalizing fragments, but nothing conclusive. References in private journals, mentions in letters, suggestions of meetings held in secret, but no membership rolls, no formal documentation of the Society's existence. I assisted as I could, my medical background proving useful when examining Whitmore's notes on the chemical compounds he had prepared. The substances, when I could identify them from his descriptions, were not inherently dangerous, but rather seemed designed to affect nervous system function in ways that might heighten perception, slow, subjective experience of time, create states of consciousness where attention became extraordinarily focused. It reminds me of accounts I've read from explorers who've experimented with various plant preparations in the Amazon, I told Holmes one evening as we compared notes. Substances that shamans use in ritual contexts, claiming they allow vision across time and space. Western science dismisses such claims as hallucination, but perhaps Whitmore was attempting to refine such effects to create controlled, measurable experiences rather than chaotic visions. The boundary between hallucination and genuine perception may be less clear than we assume, Holmes mused. If consciousness plays a role in how we experience time, as Whitmore theorized, then altering consciousness might indeed provide access to temporal phenomena normally filtered from awareness. Not traveling through time, perhaps, but perceiving it differently, more completely. Ashwood visited several times during this period, bringing additional materials from the Blackwood Collection's archives, records of the watch's acquisition, fragments of information about their previous owners, technical specifications documented during various restorations over the years. The watches themselves remained in their display case, and Ashwood reported they now kept perfect time, running without the stoppages that had initially brought him to us. It's as if solving the puzzle satisfied something, he said, wonderingly, as if they were waiting to have their secret revealed. And now that it has been, they can simply be watchers again, doing what watchers do. Or, Holmes suggested, the stoppages were never mechanical failure, but rather deliberate signal, a call for attention that ceased once attention was properly given. Whitmore designed them as a message. Once the message was received and understood, their communicative function fulfilled itself. On a grey afternoon, some 2 weeks after our discovery, as Holmes and I sat reviewing Whitmore's journals for perhaps the dozenth time, a thought occurred to me that I voiced hesitantly, unsure of its validity. Holmes, what if the greatest mystery is not how Whitmore's mechanisms work, but why he created them in the first place? You read his final journal entry. He was afraid, tormented by the implications of his discoveries. Why then go to such elaborate lengths to preserve them, to create a puzzle that would lead someone to this hidden chamber? If he truly wanted the knowledge buried, he could have destroyed everything, rather than simply drowning himself, while clutching gears he could have discarded at any point. Holmes looked up sharply, his eyes bright with interest. An excellent question, Watson, and one I confess I had not adequately considered. You're quite right. His actions were contradictory. He claimed to want the knowledge lost, yet he carefully preserved it, encoded it, created a path by which it could be recovered. Perhaps, I continued, warming to the idea, he recognized that the decision was too large for one man, too important to be made in isolation and fear. By creating the puzzle, by hiding the knowledge but leaving clues to its location, he effectively passed the choice to the future, to whoever might come after, allowing them to decide with the benefit of additional time, additional perspective. A democratic approach to profound questions, Holmes murmured. Rather than acting as sole arbiter, he created conditions where the decision would be distributed, considered by multiple minds across multiple generations. Ingenious, really, and deeply humble despite the apparent arrogance of his claims. This insight shifted something in how I viewed the entire affair. Whitmore emerged not as a mad genius destroyed by his own brilliance, but rather as a deeply thoughtful man who recognized the limits of his own judgment, who created a mechanism, not a temporal mechanism, but a social one, for ensuring that momentous choices were made communally rather than individually. The weeks passed, autumn deepening into winter, and gradually the urgency around Whitmore's legacy began to ease, settling into something more sustainable, not forgotten, not dismissed, but integrated into the larger pattern of our lives. One mystery among many, one question among the thousands that filled Holmes's capacious mind. We visited the chamber twice more during this period, each time bringing additional equipment, documenting its contents more thoroughly, testing Whitmore's mechanisms under controlled conditions. The chronometer, measuring temporal density, indeed registered different values at different locations, though whether this reflected actual properties of time or simply localized magnetic fields and other measurable physical phenomena remained unclear. On our final visit, Holmes made a decision that surprised me. After carefully examining all of Whitmore's materials one last time, he methodically returned everything to its original position, then produced from his bag a leather portfolio I had not seen before. "I've prepared a comprehensive account of our investigation," he explained, placing the portfolio in the niche that had held Whitmore's journal. "Complete documentation of everything we've discovered, all our research, my correspondence with various scientific authorities, and most importantly, my recommendation." "Which is?" I asked. "That this chamber remain sealed for 100 years from the date of Whitmore's death, which would be March 7th, 1924. That on that date, or shortly thereafter, those who discover this account should evaluate whether sufficient scientific and philosophical progress has been made to responsibly explore Whitmore's theories. If so, proceed carefully. If not, seal it for another century. Let time itself be the test of when humanity is ready for such knowledge." It was a solution both elegant and practical, and I found myself nodding approval. Whitmore would appreciate that, I think, using time to judge questions about time. We climbed from the chamber for what would prove to be the final occasion, at least in my lifetime, and carefully sealed the entrance, disguising it so thoroughly that even we would have difficulty locating it again without detailed maps. As we worked, I felt a curious sadness, as though saying goodbye to a friend glimpsed briefly before they departed on a long journey. Back at Baker Street that evening, as we settled into our customary positions by the fire, Holmes prepared his pipe and spoke quietly. "I learned that from you," I replied, "from watching you work, seeing how you distinguish between mysteries that should be penetrated and those that should be respected. It's a kind of wisdom rarely discussed, but deeply important." "Perhaps," Holmes said softly, "that is the real lesson of the drowned watchmaker. Not the specifics of his theories about time, but the larger principle that some knowledge should be approached with extreme caution, that discovery without wisdom is dangerous, that we must sometimes choose restraint over revelation." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls, and outside, the first snow of winter began falling, silent flakes drifting past the windows, each one unique, each one temporary, frozen moments in water's endless cycle, beautiful precisely because they could not last. Perhaps that was Whitmore's real discovery, not a mechanical method for manipulating time, but rather a philosophical understanding that time's value lies not in its duration, but in the meaning accumulated within it, that a single moment fully experienced carries more weight than 1,000 passed in distraction, that we preserve what matters. not by stopping time's flow, but by paying proper attention while it flows. "Holmes," I said quietly, "do you think we'll ever know if his theories were correct? If time truly can be navigated as he believed?" He was silent for a long moment, smoke curling from his pipe. "We may know, or those who come after may know, or it may remain forever uncertain. But I find myself surprisingly content with that uncertainty, Watson. We have done what we could, investigated thoroughly, thought carefully, made what seems to me a wise decision about how to proceed. Whether future generations choose differently is beyond our control, and perhaps beyond our right to control." "You've changed," I observed. "There was a time when you would have been unable to leave such a mystery unresolved, when restraint would have seemed like failure." "Perhaps I've learned something as well," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "Or perhaps I'm simply growing older, recognizing that not every mountain requires climbing, that sometimes the view from below suffices, that wisdom and boldness are not always compatible." We sat in comfortable silence as the snow continued falling outside. London gradually transforming under its soft white blanket, sounds muffled, rough edges smoothed, the city taking on that peculiar quiet that only snow can bring. At some point, Mrs. Hudson brought tea and biscuits, fussing over us gently, ensuring we were comfortable, warm, properly fed. Her care was a kind of grace, I reflected, an everyday miracle of attention and compassion that required no grand theories, no elaborate mechanisms, just human kindness expressed through simple actions. The evening deepened, and conversation turned to other matters. A letter I had received from an old school friend, a case Holmes had been consulted on involving forged paintings, the political situation on the continent, the small news and large questions that filled our shared life. The drowned watchmaker became simply another thread in the larger tapestry, important but not dominant, mysterious but not consuming. Eventually, I found myself yawning, the day's exertions and the fire's warmth combining to make sleep seem very attractive. Holmes noticed and smiled. "Go to bed, Watson. I think I'll sit up a while longer. Not from insomnia, but simply from contentment, from the pleasure of having a quiet evening to think, to reflect, to simply be without urgent demands on my attention." I rose, stretching, feeling the pleasant ache of a day well spent. "Good night then, Holmes. Don't stay up too late. Even the greatest minds require rest. Good night, old friend. Sleep well." I climbed the stairs to my room, prepared for bed with the comfortable efficiency of long routine, and slipped between cool sheets that gradually warmed from my body's heat. Through my window, I could see snow still falling, could hear its silence, that peculiar absence of sound that is itself a kind of music. My last waking thoughts were of Whitmore, of his workshop in Clerkenwell, where he had laboured over his magnificent timepieces, of the moment he must have made his fateful decision to walk toward Westminster Bridge, carrying his leather case, of whether in his final moments he felt fear or relief, or some combination of both, of whether he would be satisfied with how we had honoured his legacy. And then sleep claimed me, and I drifted into dreams where clocks ran backward and forward simultaneously, where time pooled in deep eddies and rushed in quick currents, where I walked through chambers filled with frozen moments, each one preserved like an insect in amber, beautiful and sad and somehow eternal despite their fundamental impermanence. The winter passed as winters do, each day adding its small increment the season's accumulation, snow falling and melting and falling again, the city cycling through its moods, bright and crystalline when sun struck fresh snow, brooding and grey when clouds pressed low, harsh when wind howled down narrow streets, carrying ice like tiny daggers. Holmes's research into Whitmore's theories continued in a desultory way, no longer urgent but not abandoned, integrated into his larger pattern of intellectual engagement. He published a paper in a philosophical journal under a pseudonym, exploring the relationship between consciousness and temporal perception, the writing theoretical enough to avoid revealing the specific context of our discoveries, but original enough to generate interesting discussion among academics who trafficked in such questions. Ashwood wrote periodically, reporting that the watches continued keeping perfect time, that visitors to the museum admired them without knowing their true significance, that he found deep satisfaction in being guardian to such secrets. "I understand now," he wrote in one letter, "that some knowledge is most valuable when kept rather than shared, when preserved in quiet waiting rather than trumpeted abroad. The watches teach me patience, and through them Whitmore teaches us all humility." Spring arrived eventually, as it always does, London's parks erupting in green, flowers opening to tentative sunshine, the air losing its bitter edge, acquiring instead the softness of renewal, of possibility, of cycles continuing their eternal turning. On a particularly beautiful May evening, as Holmes and I walked through Regent's Park enjoying the mild weather, our conversation turned once again to the affair of the drowned watchmaker. "Do you have regrets," I asked, "about not pursuing the investigation more aggressively, not testing Whitmore's mechanisms fully?" Holmes considered this, watching ducks glide across the park's lake, their movements creating spreading wakes that caught the evening light. "Regrets? No, I don't think so. Curiosity, certainly. I remain curious about what we might have discovered. But curiosity and regret are different things. I am content with our choices, satisfied that we approached the matter thoughtfully rather than recklessly." He paused, then continued, "There's a certain maturity in recognizing that not every question requires an immediate answer, that some mysteries can be carried comfortably, lived with rather than solved. The younger version of myself would have been unable to accept that, would have demanded resolution at any cost, but I have learned, partly from you, partly from experience, that wisdom sometimes manifests as patience, that the long view serves better than the urgent one." "You've taught me as much as I've taught you," I replied. "More, probably. The discipline of observation, the importance of evidence, the value of logic, applied carefully to complex problems. These are gifts you've given me." "We've taught each other then," Holmes said simply, "as friends do, as partners do, each bringing different strengths, different perspectives, the combination creating something neither could achieve alone." We walked in comfortable silence, and I reflected on how the drowned watchmaker affair had been in many ways emblematic of our entire partnership. A mystery approached collaboratively, solved through combined effort, the resolution coming not from brilliant individual insight, but from thoughtful discussion, careful research, mutual respect. The sun was setting now, painting clouds in shades of amber and rose, and London spread before us in all its vast, complex beauty, a city of millions, each living their own lives, pursuing their own mysteries, accumulating their own moments into the larger story of human existence. "Time is strange," I said quietly. We measure it precisely with our watches and clocks, divide it into seconds and minutes and hours. Yet it refuses to behave consistently. Some moments flash past, others stretch endlessly. Whitmore wasn't wrong about that. Time does vary, does pool and rush, does respond to consciousness in ways we don't fully understand. Perhaps, Holmes replied, his greatest contribution wasn't discovering how to manipulate time mechanically, but rather articulating what we all know intuitively, that lived time and measured time are different things, that the quality of moments matters more than their quantity, that a life should be judged not by its duration, but by its depth. A fitting epitaph for a watchmaker, I observed, that he ultimately looked beyond the mechanics of time to its meaning. We emerged from the park as twilight deepened, gas lamps beginning to glow along the streets, the city transforming once again, taking on its evening character, more intimate than daylight's harsh clarity, more mysterious, more suggestive of secrets hidden just beyond vision's reach. Back at Baker Street, we found Mrs. Hudson had prepared a light supper, and we ate while reading the evening papers, discussing the day's news, the ordinary business of life, continuing alongside and around the extraordinary mysteries that periodically disrupted its smooth surface. Later, as I prepared for bed, I found myself standing at my window, looking out over London's rooftops, watching smoke rise from countless chimneys, seeing lights in windows where other lives were being lived, other stories unfolding. Somewhere out there, beneath the Thames's dark waters, the chamber waited, holding Whitmore's secrets, and now Holmes's account, time itself appointed as judge of when such knowledge should be revealed. The thought pleased me that we had found a solution that honoured both the past and the future, that respected both discovery and restraint. I thought of the 7 watches in their case at the Blackwood Collection, keeping time with patient precision, each tick marking another moment past, another second added to the vast accumulation that constitutes history. They would continue ticking long after I was gone, after Holmes was gone, perhaps after everyone who currently lived had passed into memory. And this too seemed right, that our mysteries should outlast us, that each generation should inherit its own puzzles to solve, its own choices to make. Sleep came easily that night, and with it, dreams that were peaceful rather than troubled, filled with images of gardens and flowing water, of clocks whose hands moved in spirals rather than circles, of Whitmore himself standing by his workshop bench, looking up to smile and nod approval, as if to say, "You did well, you understood, you honoured what I could not complete." The years that followed saw Holmes and me continuing our partnership, investigating cases both celebrated and obscure, maintaining our comfortable residence at Baker Street, aging gradually but gracefully, our friendship deepening with time's passage, in the way that good friendships do, requiring less explanation, allowing more silence, resting on foundation so solid that words became almost superfluous. We spoke of Whitmore occasionally, usually prompted by some external trigger, a newspaper article about advances in physics, a conversation about the nature of time, a visit from Ashwood bringing news of the watches. But the affair ceased to occupy the central position it had held briefly, settling instead into memory's comfortable arrangement, one story among many, significant but not overwhelming. I wrote up an account of the case, naturally, my habit with all our investigations, but this one I kept private, not publishing it with the others, sensing that it contained material too sensitive, too uncertain in its implications for public consumption. Perhaps someday, I thought, perhaps after both Holmes and I have departed, someone will discover this manuscript and judge whether the time has come for wider revelation. But that judgment belonged to the future, not to me, and I found peace in that delegation of responsibility. As I write these words now, many years after the events I have described, I find myself returning to certain questions with new perspective. What did we truly discover in that chamber beneath the Thames? Was Whitmore a genius who glimpsed genuine truths about time's nature? Or was he a brilliant craftsman whose philosophical theories exceeded his evidence? Did his mechanisms actually function as he believed, or did coincidence and suggestion create effects we interpreted according to his framework? I still cannot answer these questions with certainty, and I have come to believe that this uncertainty is itself valuable, that the mystery serves a purpose beyond its solution, that some questions keep us humble, keep us seeking, keep us open to possibilities that pure rationalism might dismiss. What I know beyond doubt is this: the investigation brought together three men who each needed something from the encounter. Ashwood needed explanation for phenomena that had shaken his worldview, needed context and framework to make sense of disturbing events. Holmes needed a mystery worthy of his abilities, needed intellectual challenge that required not just logic but also wisdom, not just solving but also choosing. And I needed reminder that partnership matters more than individual brilliance, that the greatest discoveries often come not from competitive striving, but from collaborative exploration. We each received what we needed, and in the receiving, we gave something to each other. Ashwood, his trust and his expertise. Holmes, his reasoning and his restraint. I, my friendship and my willingness to engage uncertainly. The watches still tick in their case at the Blackwood Collection, still keep perfect time, still hold their secrets within mechanisms too intricate for casual understanding. Visitors admire them without knowing what they truly represent. And perhaps this is appropriate, that the sacred can hide in plain sight, that the extraordinary can wear the disguise of the ordinary, that mysteries need not announce themselves to maintain their power. As for Josiah Whitmore himself, that troubled genius who drowned carrying gears inscribed with virtues, I like to think he would be satisfied with how matters resolved. We found his message, decoded his puzzle, discovered his hidden chamber, and then, crucially, we chose wisdom over ambition, chose preservation over exploitation, chose to honor the mystery rather than destroy it through premature revelation. In doing so, we became not just investigators of his legacy, but also participants in it, adding our own chapter to a story that began before we were born and will continue after we die. A story about time and meaning, about knowledge and responsibility, about the choices we make when confronted with power we may not be ready to wield. The fire burns low now in my study as I write these final words, and through my window I can see stars emerging in the darkening sky, distant lights that left their sources years or centuries ago, their photons traveling through time to reach my eyes in this specific moment, creating connection across vast durations, making the past and present briefly contemporary. Time is mysterious, yes, more mysterious than any watch can measure, more complex than any theory can fully explain. But it is also generous, giving us each our allotted moments, allowing us to fill them as we choose, to create meaning through attention, to build legacies, not through grand gestures, but through patient accumulation of care, of work, of love. That is what Whitmore learned, I think, in those final hours before he walked toward Westminster Bridge. That is what he tried to tell us through his elaborate puzzle. That is what we discovered in a chamber beneath the Thames. Not a method for escaping time, but rather a deeper understanding of how to live within it. And so the mystery rests, waiting for whatever future may come, guarded by locked watches and hidden chambers, by decisions made carefully and choices postponed wisely, by the understanding that some questions answer themselves through patience, that time itself resolves what human effort cannot force. May those who come after us, who discover this account, or encounter the drowned watchmaker's legacy in whatever form it takes, approach it with the same care we tried to demonstrate, the same respect for both knowledge and its limits, the same humility before mysteries that exceed our full understanding. May they choose wisely, as we endeavoured to choose. May they honour the past while serving the future. May they find, as we found, that the greatest treasures are not always the ones we grasp, but sometimes the ones we preserve, not the mysteries we solve, but the ones we pass forward, enhanced by our care, worthy of whatever time may bring. And now, dear listener, our story draws to its close. The drowned watchmaker's enigma, neither fully solved nor abandoned, but rather held in that productive tension between knowing and wondering, between discovery and restraint. You have journeyed with me through rain-soaked London streets, into underground chambers, across the investigation's many phases, and I hope the journey has brought you the peace and quiet that was its purpose. If your thoughts have slowed, if the day's tensions have eased from your shoulders, if sleep now beckons with gentle insistence, then these words have served their purpose. Before you drift fully into dreams, I want to ask a small favour. If this story brought you comfort, if you found value in these hours we've shared, please consider subscribing to this channel, offering a like to show your appreciation, leaving a comment sharing where in this vast world you're listening from. These simple actions help others find these stories, help build a community of quiet seekers, help ensure more tales like this can be crafted and shared. But whether you do so or not, know that I'm grateful you were here, that your listening gave these words meaning, that your presence, though I cannot see or hear you, was felt across whatever distance separates us. As you close your eyes, let the drowned watchmaker's legacy settle into your mind like snow falling on quiet streets, soft, gradual, transforming the landscape without force or violence. Let time slow, let moments stretch, let consciousness drift toward that borderland, where waking and sleeping merge into something neither and both. The watches tick on in their distant case, marking moments that accumulate into minutes, into hours, into lives fully lived. The chamber rests beneath the Thames, holding its secrets with patient silence. The mystery endures, beautiful in its incompleteness, valuable in its restraint. And you, dear friend, wherever you are, whatever brought you here tonight, may you find deep and restful sleep. May your dreams be gentle. May tomorrow greet you with kindness. Good night, sleep well, and may time treat you gently in all its mysterious flowing. Until we meet again in some future story, in some other quiet evening, I bid you peaceful rest and pleasant dreams. Good night.